This presentation is loosely based around and related to my dissertation research project. So for the purpose of today, I really just wanted to pick out just a couple of aspects from it, which I hope are relevant and give you a bit of a taster of some of the approaches I was working with. So one of the key aspects is this idea of a diffractive methodology and diffractive data analysis. And I want to give just a bit of an overview of what that meant to me. I'm very briefly going to mention some of the theories I was working with too, just for a bit of context, but they can take a little bit of time to get your head around. So I'll do my best to summarize them, but I'm really happy to go into more depth afterwards. So first, I'm going to briefly outline the background which led to the project. Then I'll explain the underlying diffractive methodology and process through which I carried out diffractive data analysis. So I'll touch on the insights generated, multimodal in nature, and some of the questions revealed. It's important really to note that a project aim was not necessarily to seek generalized conclusions, but rather to experiment with how a diffractive approach might help for critical exploration of the entanglement of AI technologies and education. So I'm going to end by posing a question, which I hope might help to provoke discussion in our Q&A. So when I started this project, I was working as an educational advisor and working on programs broadly exploring artificial intelligence. And while a lot of the core courses were focused on technical aspects of machine learning, there was also a focus on building responsible AI systems, looking at questions of ethics and so on. So one challenge might be how to explore such ideas with students who perhaps come from a computer science background, primarily, rather than a philosophy or social sciences background. So contrary to the tendency to treat ethical questions as part of a separate ethics course, or like a checklist at the end of a project, we were seeking ways to more deeply integrate ethics into the program. So at the same time, I was reading a paper by Jeremy Knox, Ben Williamson, and Sean Bain on what is termed machine behaviorism, particularly thinking about the field of machine learning and how it involves techniques which are shaped by specific ideas of learning. For example, reinforcement learning, which is commonly covered on machine learning courses, draws on radical behaviorist theories and also an area of psychology concerned with animals. It also focuses on the idea of training involving being rewarded or reinforced by wins achieved. So when applied in an educational context, might these ideas work against student autonomy and emphasize control, where the behavior of learners is shaped towards predefined aims? Anyhow, all of this made me wonder how these potentially contested ideas of learning are contextualized by AI educational programs. When, for example, reinforcement learning is introduced as part of machine learning courses, are these behaviorist ideas of learning taken for granted? Are other ideas of learning considered? And what broadly might be the ethical implications of privileging one idea of learning over another? And could such ethical considerations be part of efforts to more deeply integrate machine learning with ethics and critically consider what learning theories are prevalent in the development of AI technologies? So broadly, I wondered how these ideas might shape machine learning students' ideas about learning. And it's led me to my main research question. How do students studying machine learning conceptualize learning? But furthermore, what might be the potential ethical implications of such conceptualizations in the context of AI education and the development of machine learning technologies, especially if, for example, these ideas might emphasize control and work against student autonomy? But how might we explore students' conceptualizations of learning? Well, in thinking through this, I recalled a quote from the Manifesto for Teaching Online. Text has been troubled, many modes matter in representing academic knowledge. And I was keen to not be limited to text in exploring these conceptualizations of learning and remain open to multimodal approaches and the unique insights that they might bring. So although there are many possible theoretical frameworks of multimodality through which you could explore these conceptualizations, I was drawn to Kress's multimodal social semiotics approach, which is primarily concerned with meaning arising through sign making in social environments. So just to really briefly explain, in this framework, the sign is a partial representation of a concept, phenomenon, or object, the signified, and the signified is represented by the signifier. So these signs can exist in any mode. So it could be images, writing, speech, and so on. And according to Kress, modes are socially shaped resources for making meaning. So a concept such as learning might be signified through an arrangement of shapes, the signifier, existing as a hand-drawn image produced in a specific social environment, such as a classroom. So returning to my project, the data generation consisted of some semi-structured participatory conversations via an encrypted online chat with 7 machine learning students, based around tasks and questions, which involved them demonstrating how they conceptualize the concept of learning through the production of multimodal artifacts. So production of these artifacts was collaborative and participatory, and crucially, I acknowledged my position as researcher, unavoidably involved in their production. And this notion of the researcher being entangled in the project and the questioning of boundaries of subject and object, of researcher and site of research, aligns with my theoretical standpoint, which I'll cover a little bit more shortly. Just to initially share one of the artifacts, though, here a participant sketched out the conceptualization of learning, and a multimodal social semiotics analysis might see the signified as the concept of learning and represented by the signifier, in this case, a hand-drawn process flowchart. Attention should also be paid to the social environment through which this was produced. In this case, the image was hand-drawn by the student and posted through an encrypted online private conversation with me. So a multimodal social semiotics analysis will be concerned with how meaning is being made here and whose interest and agency is at work. However, while multimodal social semiotics could generate some useful insights on participants' conceptualizations of learning, it tends to be human-centered and focused on the agency of the human individual and reinforces subject-object binaries and indeed reinforces boundaries between the human and the machine. So this presents limitations if you are to really acknowledge the complexity of the entanglement of relations between human, non-human, material, and abstract entities, all entangled with notions of machine learning, educational practice, and ethics, through which these conceptualizations of learning arguably emerge. So it was really a key aim of this project to move beyond these limitations and find ways to explore this entanglement of more than human components. I also questioned my independence as researcher from the site of research. I was unavoidably entangled in the production of the artifacts, and rather acknowledged my position as researcher as intertwined in what Fox and Aldred, through their new materialist sociological framework, term the research assemblage. So the research assemblage is an unstable, more than human entanglement of researcher, object of research, theories, technologies, participants, and so on. And Fox and Aldred draw heavily on Deleuze and Guattari, especially their concept of the assemblage, which is conceptualized through the metaphor of the non-hierarchical and non-linear, continually branching rhizome, which has no beginning or end and connects any point to any other. In short, it calls into question traditional representationalist divisions between subject and object and boundaries between entities, and shifts the focus instead to the relations between entities. And if these boundaries are questioned, this too calls into question a traditional idea of agency. Instead, assemblages are held together by the capacity for assembled relations to affect or be affected. So, within this research assemblage, as Fox and Aldred conceptualize it, there are continually branching effective flows, and the focus shifts to these effective flows between more than human assemblages. So it's all a lot to take in, but in short, rather than focusing on the agency of individual human participants and conceptualizing learning, separating them from the technologies, theories, of myself as researcher, I'm focusing on the relations between all these entities. And taking this forward in terms of the project, the multimodal social semiotics lens appeared to not really present the whole picture, although it might offer some productive insights. And in order to interrogate this complex entanglement through which machine learning students' conceptualizations of learning emerge, I'd need to draw on some other theories. And so I looked to new materialist thought, and in particular, Karen Barrad's concept of agential realism. Barrad argues that individual entities are not pre-existing and do not interact, rather phenomena are produced through intra-actions of multiple boundary drawing practices. So it's really these repeated boundary drawing practices through which subject and object, human and machine, nature and culture and so on are constituted, which is the focus. And Barrad, in fact, terms these repeated boundary making practices agential cuts, which enact a momentary agential separability between subject and object within phenomena. Ultimately, it was really this concept actually of the agential cut, which made it in some way methodologically possible for a cut of the project findings to be presented, despite this entanglement of co-constituted entities. So there are also some other new materialist theories I work with, such as Hale's cognitive assemblages framework, which also provides a productive way to think about agency. And in particular, for this one, the capacity for choice between just entities with consciousness, such as humans, and considering also those entities without consciousness, such as objects, material forces, and so on. So there's a different but also productive framework to think with, especially when it comes to considering issues of accountability and responsibility with respect to an entanglement of AI technologies, of humans and educational practice and so on. So we've covered really briefly several theories, each broadly with potentially productive insights to work with, but not necessarily compatible, especially in the way multimodal semiotics is human-centered, while new materialist thought is not. However, this is where a diffractive methodology comes in to bring these theories together productively, searching for patterns of difference rather than similarities. So what is a diffractive methodology? Well, first, just let me show you an image demonstrating a reflection. Approaches rooted in representationalism are informed by the metaphor of reflection and tend to reinforce the subject-object boundaries. From a research perspective, mirroring and sameness is arguably emphasized through the way you might search for similarities when categorizing data. However, I'm now showing the diffraction of ocean waves through an opening. So diffraction it's a term from physics, and it refers to the new patterns produced when light, sound, water, and other waves experience obstructions or openings. And Donna Haraway actually posits diffraction, revealing patterns produced through differences, as actually an alternative metaphor to reflection. So you can see here another example of diffraction, where waves are passing through two openings. They're being diffracted and new patterns are being produced. To take forward this metaphor, as waves pass through these openings and produce new patterns, in a diffractive analysis, data is read through multiple theories, revealing patterns of difference and producing something new. So this is quite different from the search for similar categories in data according to perhaps a single theoretical perspective. So rather, a diffractive approach is open to a multiplicity of ideas and searches for difference. So, and drawing upon some examples from Matsai, a diffractive methodology and data analysis process would plug multiple theories into data and read them through one another. And so for my project and its diffractive approach, I aim to perform a multimodal social semiotic analysis and then read this through new materialist ideas to search for patterns of differences, produce new insights, and reveal, hopefully, some new questions. So what does this mean in practice? Well, during the conversations with students through which multimodal artifacts were produced, I worked through this from this analysis template, which in effect contained an anonymized transcript of the conversations, but with color-coded blocks to delineate multimodal social semiotic analysis notes, and then the subsequent diffractive analysis stage through new materialist theories. And this template also included questions based on those theories for me to read the data through. So to return to an artifact, I used the field note template to note down, for example, the hand-drawn process flowchart used to represent the concept of learning. I noted the mathematical and computational nature of the sketch. I also noted a distinction between the outside social environment and a learning agent, which was shown on this diagram. It's this agent-environment dualism, where the environment provides rewards based on the learning agent's actions, broadly draws from reinforcement learning and behaviorist psychology, and was emphasized in this sketch. However, diffracting this analysis through new materialist ideas revealed differences, such as a division between agent environment, and this division between agent environment interacting might be thrown into question by the notion of Barad's interaction. So in addition to using this analysis template, I also tried in some way to visualize the effective flows through which the conceptualization of learning emerges. trying somehow to make visible what I termed computational, behaviorist, and other flows, where it appeared such ideas were present. I followed this process for multiple artifacts, and in general, mathematical and computational conceptualizations of learning were visible, sometimes drawing on some underlying behaviorist ideas. Some had some kind of emphasis on control, as in this one, which depicts a set of rules bounding the allowed and also forbidden space of explorations for learning. So up to this point, I've been primarily looking at individual data fragments like this, but how might this all be brought together in a multimodal fashion to in some way convey the complexity and entanglement of the effective flows within the overall research assemblage? So, and I realize you may not be able to see this very well on screen, but hopefully this kind of represents some sort of, or this shows the some kind of zoomed out version of the artifact which emerged. And this is ultimately what emerged through this process. And I drew on a number of arts-based techniques. So first of all, the bricolage, using whatever is at hand and combining them into something new. And also the idea of pentimento, where earlier changes can be seen through later layers of paint and where authorship of layers is unclear. So much like, no problem. So much like the entanglement of ideas, theories, participants, researcher, and so on, through which these conceptualizations of learning emerged, it brings into question individual human agency, the idea of the pentimento. So reading this entanglement of data fragments diffractively together through new materialist theories, you can't simply say that behaviorist, computational, mathematical ideas solely influence these students' conceptualizations of learning. And nor can you simply say conceptualizations of learning are representations of ideas from their machine learning studies, or their studies alone might change the nature of AI technologies they may in future develop. So rather, these and many other aspects, which hopefully this artifact somehow conveys, co-constitute one another through a complex array of constantly changing effective flows. And finally, if one wanted to bring different notions of learning to AI education, perhaps those not rooted in behaviorist ideas, um, while issues of agency and responsibility are complicated, in fact, all more than human components within the entanglement are actually mutually responsible. So in conclusion, this project wasn't seeking generalizable conclusions as such, but was a modest attempt to engage productively with a multiplicity of theories through a diffractive methodology and hopefully reveal some new questions. I'm happy to just maybe go into any details of this artifact. I can actually zoom in here and sort of show you a little bit more things in detail. And I'm happy to go into sort of any of the aspects of it. But effectively, yeah, it's like a bricolage of the different artifacts which were emerged from this project. And as you can see, the arrows between them kind of delineate some kind of effective flows as well that were part of that. And it just provided a way to convey this entanglement in a way. It was a cut, really. It's kind of one possibility of many, drawing on that kind of notion of the agential cut. But really, it was aimed to kind of convey that complexity and maybe provide a way to, rather than just like look at individual data fragments, but really to kind of bring it all together. Anyhow, I'm really happy to go into any more details on that in the Q&A. But I just wanted to end on a final question to think with. And how could these diffractive approaches potentially inform transdisciplinary AI education and research? And could the ability of a diffractive methodology to work with multiple theories and ideas, even those apparently incompatible, somehow inform AI education seeking to deeply integrate ethical concerns or issues of accountability and responsibility in a transdisciplinary manner where boundaries between theories and disciplines are broken down? This might potentially be interesting to consider for not just research, but also transdisciplinary educational activities in AI education, designed to really critically consider these concepts of learning and really deeply integrate ethics and look at the ethical implications as well. So do feel free to post any thoughts in the chat, or we can pick it up in the Q&A on the comments on the conference site. And yeah, thank you very much for your time.